Hello and welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane Q&A video today. Thank you very much for sending in all your comments and questions. I read them all. I put them in a file and I choose 5 or 6 per video. So there's a lot I haven't got to. So apologies, but I am reading them and I'll definitely get through them all at some point. But keep sending them in. They're really interesting. I've been on my travels. Couple of bits of sad news to begin with. One of my colleagues, Chris Dabbs from MCN, recently passed away, which was very sad. Chris used to be a road tester at MCN in the late 80s and 90s. Somebody I really looked up to, somebody I used to read back in the day. He was one of the superstar motorcycle journos. I remember him with his Wayne Rainey crash helmet and MW MCN coloured leathers. Looked up to him greatly, and I met him when I joined MCN in 2002. But by that time, unfortunately, he had a bad bike accident and was paralysed from the chest down. So I've only known him as Chris Dabbs, kind of Mark II, I suppose. But he was an absolute great man, really great guy. I mean, I never heard him complain. And it must have been hard for him. I mean, that's putting it lightly, isn't it? To even stay working at MCN, really, surrounded by, you know, motorcycles and able-bodied people who could go and enjoy motorcycles when he couldn't. But he was an incredible person that rode from time to time. He managed to get on a bike a couple of times. And I went to his funeral recently, and it was absolutely packed out with lots of different strands of his life, you know, of his motorcycle life. Lots of people I knew there from the industry, but also his charity work. He was a keen sailor, did basketball and all sorts of things. So it was a great send off and a tribute to Chris Dabbs. So he'll be sadly missed. And also somebody I met briefly, Matt Durrans, who hosts the bike show on YouTube, sadly passed away. I met Matt on a Ducati Multistrada V2 launch a couple of years ago. I didn't know him very well, but he was a great guy. He's a Brit. When I met him, we were in Spain, and he lives in a camper van here, and he was doing all his videos from a camper van, which is really cool. So I immediately subscribed to his channel. So yeah, he'll be sadly missed too. We've also been riding some motorcycles. So I rode at long last, after lusting after it ever since it was unveiled, Yamaha's XSR 900 GP in Marlborough colours at Donington. So that was great. I did that one for Bike Magazine. You can read all about that in a forthcoming issue. And that was at Donington. I also rode my KTM long-term test bike 1390 Super Ducar Evo at Donington, so that was a good day. Went to Suzuki Live at Cadwell Park. You'd have seen the last couple of videos now of me being there. Great event, superbly organised, great weather, just loads of really nice people. Got to ride my GSX-R 750. Got to ride a racing GSX-R 750. That video's coming up on the channel soon. And mainly the thing that kind of tickled me the most was the fact that a lot of you guys came up to say hello, been watching the channel. So, you know, obviously I do a lot of all my work. I'm employed by MCN and I do all my videos there. So that's where people would kind of know my reviews from. But it was really nice that people watch my little personal channel and enjoy it. So thank you very much for that. And then we've also done a group test, a sports bike group test for A2 license holders. So all the sports bikes are 47 bhp, the Aprilia RS457, see if I can remember them all, there's 5. Honda CBR 500R, Kawasaki Ninja 500, KTM RC390 and CF Moto 450 SRS. So it's kind of the final of the trilogy of sports bikes tests we've done recently. We did a middleweight sports bike test, the bikes between 70 and 100 bhp, which was won by the Suzuki GSX-8R, which is a great bike. Then we did a Super Sport group test with the usual suspects: CBR 600, ZX6R, V2 Panigale, and a wild card, the Street Triple RS, which a lot of people didn't really get the premise of that test or that video, and complained very ferociously that Super Sport 600s should be 600cc inline fours, which we all know, but you know, that test has been done a million times, so we're trying to be a little bit more left field about it. And now this A2 license test. So we did that on the road. We went to a drag strip to do performance testing, dynoing, weighing the bikes, everything in between. And we also got our videographer at MCN, who's 24-year-old Joseph Wright, who's just coming to the end of his A2 license period. He's going to get a big bike soon and a full license. He's closer to those bikes than I am, so you know, his comments are quite interesting about what a 24-year-old wants out of a motorcycle, rather than a crusty old road tester 30 years his senior. So look out for that test. But in the meantime, let's do some questions. So the first one is from Jason Mondo. Thank you very much for your question. A good follow-up question to the OEM tyre situation. Which new bike would you say benefits or transforms the absolute most from a new set of tyres? Really good question. So, as we all know, and as we've spoken about before, all new bikes, they come on tyres which are generally 95, maybe more % of the time, they have what they call original equipment tyres. So if, say, an R6 comes out with Dunlops, those Dunlops will be made specially for that bike. And say if it's a Dunlop Sport Smart, for example, which is an old generation tyre now, if you were to buy a Dunlop Sport Smart from a dealership, they're called replacement tyres, and they're generally better than OE tyres. So OE tyres are used by manufacturers because, for a number of reasons really. I mean, a lot of it's cost. So a manufacturer will work hand in hand with the tyre manufacturer during the course of development, because can you imagine when you're developing a bike, how many tyres must you get through? So it's a cost thing there. The tyre manufacturer will give the bike manufacturer a good price for tyres, but maybe that good price will be for a tyre that's not quite at the level of a replacement tyre. So it might not be multi-compound like the replacement tyre is. It might be an old tyre with just a new tread pattern of the latest model tyre, and they'd call it what the new model tyre is. So generally OE tyres are they're a little bit more hard wearing sometimes than replacement tyres, because the kind of design brief for the tyres will be make them last a long time, make them be really stable, and make them really cheap. Those three things really. Even on, you know, bikes you wouldn't expect to have OE tyres, you know, some quite expensive super bikes, because those tyres have to match what the bike manufacturer wants. And you can normally tell an OE tyre because they'll have a letter after the tyre name. It'll be sort of, I don't know, if it was a Sport Smart 4, for example, it'll be a Sport Smart 4 with a little E next to it, or an N, or whatever. And you can only buy those tyres from the bike dealership, whereas you can buy replacement tyres from any tyre retailer. In answer to your question, just about every new bike would benefit from replacement tyres, even if you got the same, what you think is the same tyre again, but it's a replacement version. So probably most Japanese bikes, their tyres are kind of dumbed down the most, and you'd see the biggest gain from fitting replacement tyres. But even European bikes that have kind of good name tyres on them, which you think are going to be full fat, sometimes they're watered down a little bit. But you know, I wouldn't say if you buy a new bike just scrap the OE tyres straight away, because they're all good, they're all safe. But when they're worn out, definitely get yourself some of the latest generation replacements, you know, no matter what make they are or what genre they are. replacement tyres do make a big difference, especially I'd say on Japanese bikes. But that's a really great question, and it's a shame really. OE tyres, they sometimes, back in the day when they were really bad, they give that tyre manufacturer a bad name and people don't want to touch them again. So sometimes it can work against the manufacturers. But really good question, thank you very much. Next is from Botil 6475. Hi Neezy, you talked about riding on track a couple of years ago in a video. You said that being at high RPM far from peak torque in the corner is the way to go, and it absolutely is. The only thing I'm worried about is what's the situation with high power V2 bikes. Most of the Ducatis have less than 3000 RPM between maximum torque and the red line, and the revs max out at 10 to 11,000 RPM. They also have a steeper torque curve most of the time. I thought, what if I go mid RPM and build up the power by nearly max throttle? Great video, thanks for all the tips over the years. No problem, thank you very much for the question. Well, yeah, this is a thing really that was drummed into me at the Ron Haslam Race School. It's also, I did a lot of work with Simon Crafar when he developed his Moto Voodoo project. And both of these riders come from Grand Prix back in the 500 days, where to be safe you need to keep the revs up. So mainly with an inline 4 powerful motorcycle, superbike or whatever, but it works with most bikes. If you go through a corner with your revs too low, then if the tyre spins, then you've got quite a baggy throttle connection. There's not really, that's what makes the bikes feel so smooth on the road. When you're at low revs in high gears, it's nice and smooth, but you haven't got a very good throttle connection. Whereas if you're in high revs, low gear, you know yourself how instant what you do with the throttle is. So if you have a wheel spin at full lean in the middle of the corner at low revs, if it spins, when you shut the throttle, it doesn't come straight back. Or if you don't shut the throttle in time, the revs spool up all the way from low revs all the way to high revs, where eventually the bike will either grip as it hits the limiter and throw you over the top, or eventually you ease off and it grips and it throws you over the top. Also, having high revs in the corner means you can accelerate out faster than you would do at lazy revs. It stops the tyre spinning in the first place because you're up at peak torque. It's that kind of torque effect that makes the bike spin. It wheelies less coming out the corners. You can keep a tight line. It's just win, 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 win. But yeah, when you come to a bike that's a big V-twin or a single, say, you can't afford to scream the revs because you'll run out of revs between the apex of the corner and the corner exit. And that's something you definitely don't want to do. You don't want to be changing gear halfway out the corner. You need enough revs left to get from apex to exit, really. So really that's what's going to govern your sort of gear selection and your rev point in the middle of the corner. As you go into the corner, you need enough revs coming out. And also with a twin, your torque starts a lot earlier. So when you're in the corner, you're already in that zone. You're already kind of swimming around kind of peak torque anyway. So you're kind of safe. It's less likely that the bike's going to wheel spin, and you have got that good connection. And the tyre's dug in anyway, because as soon as you crack the throttle with a big twin, poof, the rear tyre's in the ground. So yeah, you can't really have that kind of rev the bike to the moon and back on a big twin like you can a 4. So yeah, your gear choice is all about having enough revs coming out the corner. But that's a great question, and something that I have to readjust my riding style when I'm on something like that compared to a 4 when I'm around the track. Especially now I've got a KTM Super Duke, big V twin. Quite often I can use a gear higher than I would do around corners just because it's got so much grunt coming out. And yeah, when the tyre's dug in, it's less likely to spin. Great question, thank you very much. Next one is from Space YouTube. Right, starts with a quote. Thank you very much for your question. With my MCN hat on, we never talk about the bike's looks really, because style and taste and all the rest of it is very subjective. We just kind of deal in the facts when we road test about what a bike is and what it's like to ride. Right, so that's something I've said about when we do road tests, whether we talk about looks or not. And then so you go on to say, can you explain how a bike's riding characteristics are not also subjective? I think they are. I believe setup and the feel you get from a motorcycle is just as subjective as its appearance. The spec sheet is a list of details, components and measurements that can be reported objectively, but the way they're combined to interact with the rider is not. By virtue of throwing a leg over a bike, the rider adds a myriad of variations, preferences and inputs that are unique to them and the time and place they are riding. Sure, reviewers can reach a consensus that a bike is good to ride, but these are still personal opinions and thus by definition subjective. So clearly wanting to avoid subjectivity isn't the reason you're reluctant to talk about a bike's styling. I'd hazard a guess you don't want to offend anyone's taste, and that's okay. Edit 1989 GSXR 750 RRK with the alloy tank and key end flat sides. What a bike. Yes, that means you'll have to do an OW1, an 851, 888 and an RC30 video too, maybe even a ZXR 750RR. Definitely, I'd love to do that. Interesting question. So just, the reason we don't talk about looks in a test or anything that is kind of subjective is because you've only got a certain amount of words in a group test, and if you waste those words telling somebody something either they already know or it's their choice of what to think of that particular subject. So looks, there's no point wasting a paragraph talking about the looks when you could spend it on talking about what the bike's like to ride. And yeah, I agree that when you throw a rider on a motorcycle, it is very much the rider's opinion, but that's what you're reading the road test for. You're reading the road test for that rider's opinion and whether you think you can relate to that rider or not. That's why you choose articles written by certain people. For example, people may think that, well, I'm a sports bike rider, what do I know about touring bikes? Or someone might think vice versa, which isn't true because you try and be as, objective as you can. So yeah, I agree. What a rider feels from a bike can be different between two riders. So for example, if you've got a fast rider and a slow rider, the way they go through corners is different. So generally the slower rider is fast in the middle of the corner, so they'll feel a certain thing from the bike, and the fast rider is slow in the middle of the corner, so they'll feel something completely different. They'll probably feel a sweeter handling bike than the slower rider because they've gone in on the brakes fast, stopped, turned and come out, whereas the slower rider goes through the corner with more corner speed and they may run into more problems. So yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, road testing is very much an opinion, but there are things you can be objective about. You can be objective about riding positions. Of course, you may find them comfortable or not, but you can say there is room on this bike, there isn't room on this bike, there is buffeting on this bike, there isn't. The brakes do a certain thing when you pull them hard, they may lack feel. You can say that the tyres do a certain thing with regarding to grip. You can talk about handling. You can talk about power delivery. You can talk about if the throttle comes with the throttle pickup, if it's jerky, if it's smooth, if the rev range is smooth, where the power comes in and all the rest of it. So yeah, you can be quite objective about a lot of testing criteria, and that's what tyre manufacturers and motorcycle manufacturers have to do. Their test riders don't just come in with an opinion on their tyres or bikes. They are filling out ultra detailed questionnaires about what the components and what they're feeling objectively rather than subjectively. So yeah, you try and take as much of your own kind of personal views out of testing a motorcycle and just try and drill into what the facts are. But yeah, inevitably it's still an opinion, and that's why we've all got different opinions on bikes, and that's what makes the world a better place, and that's what makes the fact there's lots of motorcycle media to consume out there a better place. Some people might kind of really warm to a certain influencer, and that's where they get their riding advice and buying advice, which is fine. Some people might go for experienced road testers, and kind of everything in between is all good. It's all good. And I suppose it's up to the viewer or the reader to kind of wade through all the information and pick out what's good for them. And also that's the fun bit, isn't it? You know, motorcycling is our passion, it's our hobby. It's not about just reading something in black and white and okay, that's the opinion. It's about, geeking out all the facts and being an anorak and everything, and just immersing yourself in the joy of motorcycling and motorcycling reviews and videos and all the rest of it. So, but that's a great question. And like I said in the previous video, I'd love to even touch a GSX-R 750 RRK 1989. So if anyone's got one, I'd love to have a look at one day. But yeah, great question. Next is from Chris West 2290. An easy bike. Well, in that case, I can't remember what that was the answer to, but thank you very much for your question. I really enjoy the content. I never miss an episode. My quick question is about the bikes used on new bike launches. Let's take a Ducati launch. Ducati will provide a load of brand new bikes that get trashed around a track by all motorcycle journalists and YouTubers. Are these bikes pre-run in for a bit of extra performance and protect the engine? And mainly, what becomes of these bikes? Are the same bikes shipped around the world for launch events in different regions, and ultimately are they resold? If so, do the customers know the bike's history? Please keep the content coming as frequently as possible. Cheers. Well, no problem. Thanks for your question. Yeah, bikes at bike launches, I suppose they're all done a little bit differently. You kind of have two types of bike launches. You have full-on international bike launches that are put on by the motorcycle manufacturers, the actual factory, and you have motorcycle launches that are arranged by kind of the local importers. So when I say local, I don't mean the one down the road. It's kind of, say for Suzuki, for example, it would be Suzuki Europe or Suzuki Germany or whatever. The actual launches, when you go on them, feel and look and are basically exactly the same, but the bikes come from different areas. So with factory launches, the bikes come directly from the factory. Sometimes they're pre-production models. So in that case, those bikes would have been run in to an extent, and because they're pre-production models, they would generally be destroyed at the end of the launch because maybe some things aren't quite up to spec, some things aren't fully signed off at that point. Sometimes we do a launch and the bikes don't come out for another 6 months. Generally they're the same bike because all the tooling and everything would have been made, but they're pre-production, so they wouldn't want to get back into the dealer network or whatever. So yeah, those bikes appear and then they're scrapped, and that's the end of it. With regard to the launches that are done by the local importers, their bikes will normally end up in the dealer network sometimes. So sometimes the bikes will be shipped to them by the factory, full production bikes, to a launch location in Spain, say. The local importer will uncrate all the bikes, PDI them, and then probably spend about a week or so running them in and preparing them. There'll be nothing special about these bikes, not that you know of. The journalists will ride the bikes and the YouTubers and whoever over a period of weeks. And then quite often those bikes will either go back to the importers and used as press bikes during the year. And then they eventually may make their way into the dealer network. So yeah, because they're full production bikes, and they'll be really well looked after. Even though the journos are ragging around on them for a few weeks, you've got an absolute team full of battery engineers with the bikes that are prepping them all the time. So if you can get an ex-launch bike, they'll probably be the best prepared of any second-hand bike. So yeah, that's what happens. And then, obviously some bikes don't make it back at all because they've been crashed. But I hope that answers your question. Thanks very much. Right. This one's from Executive Cars York, 6883. Could you by any chance do an Arai helmet talk? I see you wear mostly Arai helmets. Do you have to put bigger cheek pads in to make them tighter? anything above 100 mile an hour on a naked demands a really tight helmet. How do you get around this? Yeah, great question. So yeah, I've worn Arais most of my biking career. At the moment I'm wearing the Alpine Stars SR10 as well as Shoei XSPR racing helmet and a touring helmet as well. But with any helmet, you know, they come in small, medium, large, extra large or whatever. There's probably only a very slim chance that helmet will fit you absolutely perfect, you know, and that's kind of a lifetime's work really, trying to settle on a crash helmet that fits you absolutely correctly. You know, people say you've got an Arai head or a Shoei head or whatever, and it's always a good idea to try helmets on in the shop just to make sure it fits absolutely perfect. But sometimes they're going to need a little bit of adjustment. So with my Shoei, they do a personal fitting service where they measure your head, they type all your measurements into a computer, have a look at what size crash helmet you're wearing, and then they'll suggest loads of different pads that can be inserted into the lining by an expert, pre-cut pads, and they'll give you a real snug fit. And it's the same with Arai. Arai do different skull caps, I suppose you'd call them, that are inside the helmet, and different thickness cheek pads. So with Arais, I'm kind of halfway house between a medium and a small. Small's too tight, and mediums are just a tiny bit too loose for me. So yeah, I use thicker cheek pads and thicker internals just to really make it nice and tight. And I like it really tight when I'm racing as well, because obviously the speeds, and as you say, on naked bikes, the wind's trying to lift your head off your shoulders anyway, and your crash helmet. So definitely a good idea to look into bigger cheek pads. I think the standard ones on Arai are kind of 25 or 30 mil, but I use 35 mil and extra padding just to make sure it's nice and snug, and it makes all the difference. So great question. So have a look into that. Thank you very much. And finally, from Mortal Jamor 69, sorry for ruining your name. Great video and great bike. Thank you. I was just wondering, is it bad for an engine? I think you're talking about my GSX-R 750. Is it bad for an engine in the long run when cruising around lower city speeds with low RPM or using a higher gear? Many times I notice myself going 30 mile an hour with 5th or even 6th gear on my booster. It's just more relaxing and not too twitchy when twisting the throttle. I've a loud exhaust also, so maybe thinking people around me subconsciously too. Yeah, great question. So I would say, yeah, riding around in a high gear at low revs is nice and relaxing for the road. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's the complete opposite to what you should do on the track. But for the road, you want the bike to be nice and smooth and nice and calm, nice and quiet, nice and fuel efficient. So yeah, for general riding, I'm using pretty high lazy gears, and that's fine as long as you don't kind of labor the engine. You know, if you're doing 30 mile an hour in 6th gear and it's clattering and shaking, then that's definitely not good for the engine. But you know, if the engine feels nice and balanced, then you can get away with as high a gear as you want. So absolutely. One thing I would say though is when you use high gears around town, it's really hard. It's not hard, it's harder to keep to the speed limit, because it's easy for the speed to run away because the revs aren't really changing that much. So, you know, if you really want to stick to your speed limits, and there's speed cameras everywhere now to catch you, you know, use lower gears. That's my advice. I mean, I've done a couple of speed awareness courses, and you know, you have to roll your eyes through a lot of it, but each one I haven't done that many, there's always a nice nugget of information there, you know, whether it's from, you know, recognizing speed limits in 30 and 40 zones without actually seeing the signs, just recognizing the street furniture, that kind of thing, whether it's speed limits in vans that are different to cars, whether it's I remember one of the speed awareness course, people saying about, you know, when you're on motorways and you're in a rush to overtake, they were saying you still get to your destination whether you overtake or not, because there's no such thing as a moonwalking car, which I thought was quite good. And another one they say is, you know, in lower speed limits, the gear should match the speed limit. So 30 mile an hour limits third gear, 40 mile an hour limits fourth gear, 50 fifth, and even now 20 mile an hour limits in second. It's not a bad gauge actually on a bike, if you really want to keep the speed down. But yeah, it's not as relaxing as a high lazy gear, but it's easier to keep to the speed limit. Or get cruise control, because cruise control is just manna from heaven for keeping to speed limits. You know, some cruise control doesn't go down as far as 30. My H2SX didn't last year. I really missed that. But my KTM does go down to 30. You probably need cruise control that goes down to 20 now, because trying to keep your speed just like with millimeters of throttle is so difficult. You're not actually looking where you're going. So anyway, I hope that's answered your question. Thank you everybody for your questions. Keep them coming. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you again very soon.